So Ephraim is bothered by this suggestion that Abby makes that somehow he's becoming soft. His face is instantly grim and ominous. His reaction to this is instinctive, and he seems to respond with a great deal of conviction to this because he, of course, at this moment in time, more than anything, prides I think, his rigidity and his sort of egotistical power more than anything else, and so he responds with this sort of intensity because of this. He said he'll soon discover a pause. She keeps her face turned away. He gradually softens. He stares up at the sky. Purdy, ain't it? So again, I think at this moment in time, she tries to invoke this sense of rivalry, and actually he's longing for something else. He's longing for, I think, a connection and a sense of resolution here. He's looking at the sky in the same way that Aben does throughout the play in order to try and find peace. And then she says crossly, "I don't see nothing, Purdy." The irony here is that she is obviously the embodiment of natural vitality, but is attempting deliberately to provoke him into a sense of conflict because it allows her to have power, and that's why she's so resentful of I think, Ephraim's deliberate sense of tranquility in nature. Cabot then says the sky feels like a warm field up there. And she sarcastically responds, "Are you aiming to buy up over the farm too?" So there's a real contrast here, that at this moment in time, Ephraim is attempting to invoke the kind of things I think that O'Neill throughout the play criticizes him for not connecting with, a connection with nature, a connection with vitality, a way of overcoming loneliness. He's trying to do all of those things. And she, at this moment in time, won't let him. She's already established Aben as the outlet for all of these things, and is trying deliberately to manipulate Cabot because she's already made those decisions about Aben. He then starts to talk. "I'm getting old, Abby. I'm getting ripe on the bough." And she stares at him, mystified, as he goes on. So she's kind of confused, I think, by his beginning to evoke the desire for connection and his desire to invoke sexuality. He's talking about the need to actually create an heir, as he would call it, but to sleep with her and to create a son. And he then says, "It's warm down in the barn, nice smelling and warm with the cows. Cows is queer." So there again is this, as we've seen with Simeon and Peter, there's this sort of surrogate sense of vitality and maternal connection that he deliberately invokes with the barn and with the cows, that I think shows us what happens when your life encourages a sense of loneliness that prevents you from having this emotional or vital conflict with, connection with something natural. And she says, "Like you, like Aben." So again, in his mind, he associates Aben with vitality and a type of queerness that he doesn't understand. That gives us a sense, I think, of the rationale behind why he connects with the cows rather than human beings. He finds it bizarre and he can't help himself, but he ultimately finds it queer. So he then says, "I'm getting to feel resigned to Aben, just as I got to feel about his ma. I'm getting to learn to bear his softness just like hers. I calculate I could almost take to him if he wasn't such a dumb fool. I suppose it's old age creeping in my bones." So the irony of this is that his connection with Aben begins alongside this sort of sexual and Oedipal rivalry that's established in these lines. Further down, he says, "No, I ain't. You bet. Not by a hell of a sight. I'm sound and tough as hickory." And so here, this is this sense of resolution that, again, borrows this language that is used to describe himself and Aben throughout the play. So again, that sense of resolution, I think, in the end, underlines that sense of connection that he has with Aben. He then talks about his heirs, and then it's revealed that ultimately there is no real choice but Aben in this. He says, "But after 70, the Lord warns you to prepare." And he's talking about his death. That's why Aben's come in my head. "Now that his cursed sinful brothers is gone, their path to hell, there's no one left but Aben." So it's really his only choice. So the attachment is one of convenience, and really his flaw here is that his attachment is still simply an extension of identity and egoism and all of the Apollonian connotations that brings with it. That he can't quite navigate his way out of self-occupation, because he's still bothered about clinging on to his material possessions and their worth. Abby then questions this and says, well, there's me, ain't there? What's all this sudden liking you've taken to Abram? Why don't you say nothing about me? Ain't I your lawful wife? Aye, you be. He paused and he stares at her desirously, and his eyes grow avid. Then with a sudden movement, he seizes her hands. So there's this, again, provocation of sexual awakening in Cabot that's really important. That's not really what she's talking about here. She's talking at cross purposes. She's talking about, why aren't you seeing me as the material heir to your wealth? But he reads this as some sort of invocation of their connection, a way of seeing themselves and their relationship as the place in which his wealth will be channeled ultimately when he dies. But this connection is a flawed one, and this is a I think quite a tragic moment in the play, because he goes for this connection. He attempts to create it, but it fails because she has already established this sort of vital sexual passion with Abram. He's declaiming in a queer camp meeting preacher's tempo. So again, his language that he uses to make sense of his attraction to Abby is sexuality viewed through the language of religion. He says, "You are my rose of Sharon." It's a biblical allusion. Behold, you are fair, your eyes are doves. He uses all these religious metaphors. And so, ultimately, he can't quite give up the things that O'Neill associates with an Apollonian sense of rigidity in order to connect with her, even though he uses these examples of figurative language that are about nature, but ultimately they're borrowed from the Bible. And so there's that conflict of interests there. He covers her hand with kisses she does not seem to notice, and she stares before her with hard, angry eyes. This is role reversal here, that he's become the man of passion and sensuality. I think her materialism here is ultimately what we see, and that there's this interesting kind of role reversal here. Abby then jerks his hands away harshly, which I think is to her attempting to remove the sexual contact here. And this is ultimately what conditions our ability to criticize Ephraim. He is attempting to go for the connection that I think in the end O'Neill criticizes him for not sort of cultivating throughout his life with his sons and through his rigid adherence to this type of work and life. She jerks his hands away, and she does not want to give him the opportunity to establish this deep, passionate connection. And he's dazed. Leave? And he can't even fathom this idea. That she asks him about planning to leave the farm to Abe, and he doesn't even understand. He can't even fathom the idea. It's beyond him. Shows his commitment to egotism. So he's experiencing internal conflict here. His own materialism and his greed and his rigidity is at odds with the passionate connection that he's trying to invoke with Abby. And again, that only develops, I think, the sense of coherence between him and Aben. They both have that sense of conflict between materialism and natural passion. He thinks a moment, then reluctantly says, "No, I calculate not. With a strange passion, but if I could, I would, by the eternal. If I could, in my dying hour, I'd set fire to it and watch it burn." And this is, at the same time as we're being given an element of his character and personality that we could sympathize with, we're given the complete opposite. This self-destructive extension of egotism. He would rather watch this thing that he's cultivated burnt and destroyed to the ground in order to make it apparent that that is his sole concern. I'd sit and know it was all a dying with me, and no one else could ever own what was mine, what I'd made out of nothing with my own sweat and blood. And he says, with queer affection, sept in the cows. And so there's again this bizarre sort of exception. The cows are the only thing that is excused from his all-encompassing Apollonian egotism, that he would rather see this whole thing that he has reared up out of the ground purely because he thinks difficulty and self-abnegation are spiritually valuable things. He would quite happily see all of that difficulty, all of the products of that labor completely destroyed and razed to the ground because of his all-encompassing egotism. And then she harshly says, me, and then with a queer smile says, you'd be turned free too. And I think he equates her here with the cows. He sees her along the same lines. And she is furious about this. So that's the thanks I get for marrying you, to have you change kind to Aben who hates you and talk of turning me out on the road. So her possessive materialism ultimately motivates her here. And we're seeing ultimately the characters oscillating between these two sort of competing dynamics. And that's where the sky is so important in this play. The sky is the place where both of these compulsions are ineffectual. If you are connected with the sky, you're connected with its tranquility. None of these forces have any hold over you. And she's vengeful here. He hastily says, Abby, you know I wasn't. Just let me tell you a thing or two about Aben. So her passion, I think, drives her attempt to cultivate Oedipal rivalry. Ultimately, I think this materialism plays into her desire to cultivate this sort of Oedipal rivalry. Where's he gone to see the harlot Min? I tried for to stop him disgracing you and me on the Sabbath too. And importantly, she knows, I think, that he's been guilty of this, and so his hypocrisy is extremely evident here. Rather guiltily, he's a sinner, natural born. And the irony involved in this is that he is, of course, conscious of the fact that, yes, he is a natural born sinner because he comes from my genes. It's lusty in his heart. So he knows personally, and there's again the irony, there's a sort of double irony here that he uses this language to describe himself, but of course is unaware of the extent to which both of them are connected and alike. She's enraged beyond endurance and wildly vindictive, and his lust for me, and this is where her plotting becomes sort of out of control. She loses control, I think, of her motivations here and decides to pit the two of them against each other. So she, whilst this relationship is Oedipal, as a character, she intervenes and deliberately cultivates that Oedipal rivalry. He stares at her, and then a terrible expression of rage comes over his face, and he springs to his feet, shaking all over. By the Almighty God, he re-invokes God in his wrath because the Oedipal rivalry is provoked. And I think here what you see is that his religion is a mask for his passion. And that's ultimately another way of viewing his fatal flaw, his hamartia, is that he uses ideologies and ideas and religious beliefs to mask this ultimate depth of humanity, which is the conflict between these Dionysian Apollonian impulses. And so he uses, he sort of misapplies this theology in order to try and make sense of these competing dynamics, and because of that misappropriation and misapplication, can't fully understand the conflict in which he takes place as an individual. She panics and is frightened now for Aben, so that sudden change, I think, shows her that she also has no control over the forces that compel them. Further down, her passion for Aben, in the end, ends up motivating her attempt to reconcile with Ephraim. She throws around him, "No, Ephraim," and he punches her away, "I will by God." So this, you see really when push comes to shove where her loyalties lie. And then he quibbles about the word lust. Why did you say lust? Because passion is uncontrollable, and Abby said it must have sounded worse than I meant. And I was mad at thinking you'd leave the farm. So she sort of openly admits to manipulating him. But of course the irony of this is that the thing that she is admitting to is actually true, is actually honest, and she's pretending that it's not. So the sense of authenticity is compromised here. Further down, she reaches out and takes his hand. "No, don't think of me. You mustn't drive him off. It ain't sensible. Who have you got to help you on the farm? There's no one about." And so here, the language is the opposite of her actions. She reaches out and takes his hand. And I think here, she's trying to physically manipulate him, but then invokes this sort of logical, rational language to convince him that that he needs to follow a course that allows Aben to stay. But of course, she is motivated by passion and greed. She wants Aben to stay because she's compelled towards him in a deep, powerful way. And so she's trying to preserve that, but through, borrowing his language. So she has this enormous manipulative power. And I think there's a great kind of possibility for overlap with Goldberg, particularly in the birthday party in that respect, that he can adopt some kind of guise whenever it suits him. Further down, some problematic gender politics. He says, "There's me, you're only a woman." And Cabot said, "That ain't me, a son is me, my blood, mine. Mine ought to get mine. And then it's still mine, even though I be 6 foot under, do you see?" So his entire approach to fatherhood is an expression of this controlling, all-encompassing sense of egotism. And she understands this. She understands she has no chance in relation to this egotism. So it gives him a look of hatred. And she says, I see. And she becomes thoughtful, and her face growing shrewd, her eyes studying Cabot craftily. She knows that she has to turn to more manipulative means in order to get one over him. She knows that manipulation is her skill, and Ephraim invokes God, and she then uses it against him. Her plot to reconcile her passion for Aben with the material pursuit of the farm, she says, maybe the Lord will give us a son. And so all of this is shaping up in her mind on the previous page when she is described, her face growing shrewd and her eyes studying Cabot craftily. She knows that she can combine both here. I can convince you that you are getting your extension of your ego with a son, and it means that I can keep Aben here, control him, and produce something from our powerful sense of passion and attraction to each other. He's bothered by this again because it is egotism. It's an extension. You mean a son to me and to you. It meets all of their needs here. It meets his egotism. It meets her desire to have a material claim over the farm. It keeps her there. And it also allows her to plot to have Aben sexually seduced and then him become the actual biological father. And Cabot's transformation is huge here, his face growing full of joyous pride and a sort of religious ecstasy. And the problem here is that his religious ecstasy is ultimately the kind of product of his desire for control and his need to extend his ego through a son. And she says, with a grim resolution, I want a son now. She doesn't really, the grim resolution comes from the fact that this is something that she completely is repulsed by. And Cabot says, "It be the blessing of God, Abby, the blessing of God Almighty in my old age, in my lonesomeness." And so he desires this connection to deal with his isolation, which he has in many ways deliberately cultivated. He then ends the scene vehemently. "I do anything you ask, I tell you, I swear it." So she's realised what his Achilles heel is. His Achilles heel is his all-encompassing egotism. So his hamartia is this huge sense of desire to just be almost eternal, to sort of be immortal through his own ego. And she knows that she can control him. He sinks to his knees, pulling her down with him. He trembles all over with the fervour of his hopes. And at the bottom, she pretends to do likewise, but gives him a side glance of scorn and triumph. Here, he moves in the way that she does. He has this sense of passionate hope, but it's a sort of bizarre sense of conflict that he has this fervour because of an Apollonian sort of sense of egotism. And so there's the sort of obscurity of those two compulsive desires. And she scorns his religiosity, only performing a manipulative gesture. So she's engaging in this trance, but purely on the basis of her desire to manipulate him, which is why it's not really authentic in the way that the transcendental connection that she's constantly trying to cultivate with Aben, I think, sort of dominates over this.